Imagine this: a valley in the late morning, two ridges of dry stone facing each other across a shallow stream bed. On one side, an army. On the other side, an army. And between them, walking out alone into the dust, one man. He is too tall. He is so tall the soldiers on the hill can see the sun catch on his helmet before they see his face. His armor is bronze, scale on scale, and it weighs more than a grown man. The tip of his spear alone weighs 15 pounds. He stops in the middle of the valley, plants his feet, and begins to speak. And what he says is the same thing he said yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that. For 40 mornings now, this giant has walked into the valley and given the same speech. Choose a man, send him down. If he kills me, we serve you. If I kill him, you serve us. 40 mornings, 80 speeches counting the evenings. And on the hill above, the army of Israel, soldiers with swords, soldiers with shields, soldiers who were trained for exactly this, does nothing. They listen. They look at each other. They look at the ground. They go back to their tents. The king is in his tent too. The king who was chosen because he stood a head taller than anyone else in Israel. Even he will not go down. The whole hillside has learned the rhythm of being afraid. Sunrise, speech, silence. Sunset, speech, silence. A nation paralyzed by a voice it cannot answer. And then, on the 40th morning, while the giant is still speaking, a boy walks into the camp carrying bread and cheese. If you have ever stood in front of something that seemed designed to make you feel small, a diagnosis, a conversation you cannot have, a door you cannot open, a fear that has been giving the same speech in your head for 40 mornings, this story is for you. Not as a lesson, as a letter written for you personally 3,000 years ago, and just a very long time arriving. Tonight we are going to walk down into that valley together, slowly. Because there is a detail in this story that almost every translation softens, and once you see it, the whole thing changes. Every Bible you have ever read says David ran quickly toward the battle line. The Hebrew is more honest than that. It says he was already moving while the giant was still talking. He did not wait for the speech to end. And he did not pick up one stone, he picked up 5. Nobody quite explains why 5. We will. If quiet evenings with these stories are something you need right now, stay with us. Subscribe. There will be more like this. So, let us go back to that 40th morning. The camp smells of wood smoke and old sweat and the iron tang of fear, which has its own smell when men have been carrying it long enough. The tents are pitched on the slope above the valley of Elah. The valley itself is narrow, maybe a mile across at the widest, with a stream bed running through the middle where the water moves over smooth, round stones. On the far ridge, the Philistines. On the near ridge, Israel. And every morning, like clockwork, the giant comes down. His name is Goliath, and we will spend a whole chapter on him later because you cannot understand what David did until you understand what David saw. For now, just hold the picture. A man between 9 and 10 feet tall, according to the oldest manuscripts, armor of bronze scales, a helmet of bronze, greaves of bronze on his shins, a javelin slung across his back,
a spear whose shaft is described as a weaver's beam. The thick wooden roller a loom is built around. And in front of him, a shield-bearer, because his own shield is too heavy to carry and fight with. He has been a warrior since he was a child. This is the only life he has ever had. And he stands in the valley, and he speaks, and his voice carries up both ridges, and there is no answer. 40 days. Now into this silence walks a teenager. He is not a soldier. He has not been called up. He was not even supposed to be here.
His father sent him with provisions, roasted grain, 10 loaves of bread, 10 wedges of cheese for the commander of the unit where his older brothers are serving. He is here to deliver food. He drops his supplies with the keeper of the baggage, the way you would set a bag down at a friend's door. And he goes looking for his brothers. And while he is greeting them, while he is asking how they are, the way a younger brother does, the giant walks out into the valley again, and the speech begins again. And the boy hears it for the first time. Watch his face. He is not afraid the way the soldiers are afraid. He has not been wearing this fear for 40 days. The fear has not had time to settle into his bones. He hears the words fresh. He hears them the way a child hears something a child can tell is wrong, before anyone has explained to him why it is wrong. And he turns to the men beside him, battle-hardened men, men twice his age, and he asks one question. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? That is the sentence. That is the first thing he says. Not, what do we do? Not, somebody should fight him, just, who is this? As if the question itself has already solved something, as if naming the man correctly is half the battle. The soldiers look at each other. They have been on this hill for 40 days, and not one of them has asked that question out loud. To understand what happened next, and why this story is reaching you tonight, the way some stories do, arriving exactly when you need them, we have to look at the giant first. We have to stand where the soldiers stood every morning and see what they saw. Because what David did only makes sense once you see what David refused to be afraid of. Stay close. We are walking down into the valley. Stand on the ridge for a moment. Look down. The sun is high enough now that the air above the valley shivers a little with heat, and what is moving in that heat is a man. From this distance he looks almost slow. He is not slow. He is just so large that ordinary motion on him reads as something else. The soldiers around you have learned to measure him against the things they know. He is taller than the tallest tent pole in the camp. His shadow at midday covers the ground where 3 men could lie down end to end. When he turns his head, the bronze of his helmet catches the light, and the catch lasts longer than it should, because there is more bronze there than on any helmet you have ever seen. The earliest manuscripts give his height as somewhere between 9 and 10 feet. Hold that number for a second. The doorway you walk through this morning is about 6.5 feet tall. He would have to bend almost double to come through it. He would have to turn sideways to pass through most rooms you have ever lived in. He does not live in rooms. He lives in the open. He has always lived in the open. Now look at what he is wearing. The text is unusually careful here, the way someone is careful when they want you to understand they are not exaggerating. A bronze helmet on his head, a coat of mail, scale on scale, weighing what the text calls 5,000 shekels of bronze. In modern weight, that is roughly 125 pounds of metal hanging from his shoulders. Greaves of bronze strapped to his shins, a javelin of bronze slung across his back,
and in his hand a spear. The shaft of the spear is compared by the man who wrote this down to a weaver's beam, the heavy wooden roller that an ancient loom is built around, thick as a man's wrist. The iron head of that spear alone weighs 600 shekels, about 15 pounds. 15 pounds of sharpened iron on the end of a pole that takes 2 hands to lift, and walking in front of him, almost as an afterthought, a second man, the shield-bearer.
He is there because Goliath's own shield, the great tower shield of a Philistine champion, is too heavy and too wide for one man to carry and also fight from. So another soldier walks ahead, holding the wall of bronze, and Goliath walks behind it, and the two of them move together down into the valley like a single creature with 2 bodies. This is what the army of Israel sees every morning. Not just a tall man, a walking fortress, a piece of architecture with a voice. Now consider where he came from. The Philistines were a sea people, and their warriors trained the way a craftsman trains an apprentice. Early, hard, and for life. Goliath was not chosen as a champion the week before. He had been doing this since he was a child. He had survived every fight he had ever been in, because every man he had ever fought was dead. He came from Gath, a city that bred giants the way some cities breed horses. He had brothers. The records mention them. Each one tall, each one trained. He was the largest and the most experienced, and the most calm. That last part matters. He is not raging in the valley. He is not foaming at the mouth. He is bored. He has been doing this for 40 days, and no one has come down to him, and his voice when he speaks is the voice of a man who already knows how this ends. He gives the speech the way a man closes a shop at the end of the day, with the slow patience of someone whose work is almost done. And here is the thing the soldiers on the ridge cannot stop doing. They cannot stop measuring themselves against him. They look down and they do the math. Every man on the hill in his own head, in silence. How tall am I? How much do I weigh? How long is my sword? How many years have I trained? And every answer that comes back is the wrong answer. Every answer says no. Every answer says you would not survive the first exchange. Every answer says he would lift you off the ground with one hand before you ever got close enough to swing. 40 days of doing that math will hollow a man out. 40 days of looking at something you cannot match will teach you, slowly, that the size of the thing in front of you is the only size that matters. And once you believe that, once a whole army believes that, the fight is already lost. No one needs to swing a sword. The speech has done the work. If you have ever stood in front of something and felt your own body shrink just from looking at it, a hospital chart, a court date, an empty chair at the table, a number on a screen that would not stop being that number. You know this feeling. You know how the thing in front of you starts to set the size of everything else. How your own life, your own name, your own past begins to feel smaller than the problem. That is what 40 days on that ridge does to a soldier. That is what the giant was actually doing every morning. He was not fighting. He was shrinking them. And here is the quiet thing worth holding before we move on. The giant's power was never only in his armor. The armor was real, the spear was real, the height was real. But the deepest weapon he carried was the speech, the repetition,
the slow daily work of making every other man on that hillside agree, in his own private silence, that he was too small for what stood in front of him. By the 40th morning, the army of Israel was not defeated by a sword. It was defeated by a voice. And that is why what happens next matters so much. Because the boy who walked into the camp with cheese had not heard the voice before. The voice had not yet had time to do its work on him. He had been somewhere else for 40 days, somewhere quiet, somewhere alone, with sheep. And we need to go there next. Because before you can understand why he ran toward the giant instead of away, you have to understand what the hills had already taught him. So leave the valley for a little while.
Climb up out of the Elah, past the tent line, past the last sound of armor scraping against armor, and keep going east, up into the hill country around a small town called Bethlehem. The land here does not look like land that grows anything you would expect a king to come from. It is dry. The soil is thin over limestone. The slopes are steep enough that a man walking them all day will feel it in his knees by sundown. There are scrub oaks, terebinth trees with their gray bark, patches of wild thyme that release their smell when sheep step on them. And there are wadis, narrow, twisting ravines that flood for an hour in the spring and stay dry the rest of the year. This is where the youngest son of a man named Jesse spends his days. He is the 8th boy in a family of 8 boys. The older 7 have grown up and gone. 3 of them are down in the valley right now, wearing armor, eating the cheese he just delivered. He is the one left over. He is the one with the sheep. Picture his morning. He wakes before light. He counts the flock, a small flock, maybe 20 or 30 animals, the family's own, and he leads them out of the fold while the stars are still showing. He walks them down into a wadi where there is still a little green at the bottom, or up onto a slope where the grass has not yet been chewed to nothing. Then he stands, and waits, and watches. That is the work. People who have never done it think shepherding is gentle. It is not gentle. It is the slow, patient labor of keeping something alive that is constantly trying to wander into places where it will die. Sheep walk off cliffs. Sheep get their heads stuck in thorn bushes and forget how to back out. Sheep find one patch of poisoned grass in an entire hillside and eat it. The shepherd's job is not to lead a parade. The shepherd's job is to notice, every minute, all day, what is wrong, before it becomes what is fatal. And then there are the things that come for the sheep. The Judean hills in those years still had lions. Smaller than the lions of Africa, but lions. Predators that hunted at dusk, that could break a sheep's neck with one swipe of a paw. And bears. The Syrian brown bear, now extinct in that region, then common enough that a shepherd boy would expect to meet one in his working life. Not as a story, as a Tuesday. David later tells Saul, in plain language, that both have come for his flock. And both times, he says, he went after them. He grabbed the animal by its beard or its mane. He struck it. He killed it. He does not say this the way a man brags. He says it the way a man tells a doctor what medications he is on. Just the facts of his body and what it has done. Think about what that means for the boy standing in the camp with the smell of cheese still on his hands. He has already, by the time anyone in that valley has even noticed his name, stood alone in a wadi at dusk with a wild animal between him and the only living things he was responsible for, He has already done the math no one in the army is doing. He has already learned that the size of the thing in front of you is not the same as the size of what decides the fight. A lion is bigger than a boy. A bear is bigger than a boy. He knows this in his bones, not as a sentence. And here is the other thing the hills had taught him, which is harder to name: the loneliness. The specific loneliness of years alone with animals. Days where he did not hear a human voice from sunrise to sunset. Nights in the fold with his back against a stone wall, watching the stars wheel across a sky so clear it felt close enough to touch. He had time, so much time. Time to talk to God the way you talk to someone sitting next to you, because there was no one else to talk to. Time to make up songs and sing them out loud to no one. Time to learn that the silence of the hills was not empty, that something listened. By the time he walked down into that camp with the bread and the cheese, he had spent more hours in conversation with God than most of those soldiers had spent in conversation with their wives. He did not arrive at the valley unprepared. He arrived with the wrong preparation, by everyone else's measure. No armor, no sword, no years in formation, no commander's training, but hours and hours and hours of standing in the open with something larger than him and not running. If you have ever looked at your own life and thought, "What I have been through does not count. What I have been doing does not qualify me for what is in front of me now," this story is, very quietly, for you. The boy in the camp had no resume that would have impressed anyone on that hill. He had been minding sheep. He had been singing to a sky. He had been killing animals nobody else saw him kill, in places nobody else went, for reasons that mattered only to a small flock of sheep and to him. None of it looked like training for a giant. All of it was. There is a thing the rabbis later noticed about the order of his answer when Saul finally questions him. He does not say, "I killed a lion and a bear." He says, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." The grammar is precise. He is not counting his own victories. He is counting someone else's. The years alone had taught him whose hand had actually been on the lion's neck. They had taught him that what looked like solitude was not solitude. And so when the giant's voice rolled up from the valley that morning, it did not enter an empty room in him. It entered a room that had been kept company for years by someone the soldiers on the ridge had forgotten was in the building. We are almost to the stream now, to the moment he bends down and chooses what he will carry into the valley. Watch his hands when he does it. That is where everything turns. Now back down into the valley. The stream bed runs along the bottom of it, a thin line of moving water that has been cutting this same path through the limestone for longer than anyone has been keeping count. In the dry months, it is barely a stream, more a thread of water with wide shoulders of dry, round pebbles on either side. The stones in this kind of bed have a specific quality. They have been turned by the water for so many seasons that their edges are gone. They are smooth. They fit in a hand. You could not design a better projectile if you sat down with iron tools and tried. And here, at the edge of this water, in a moment that the rider chooses to slow all the way down for, the boy bends. Watch him. He has just left the king's tent. He has just refused the king's armor. A whole scene we will not unpack right now, except to say that he tried it on
took a few steps, and gave it back. He has his staff in one hand. His shepherd's bag, really just a leather pouch, the kind he has carried in the hills since he was small enough that it dragged on the ground, is slung across his shoulder. His sling is in the other hand, and he kneels down at the water. The armies are watching, both of them. The Philistines on their ridge, Israel on theirs. 40 days of silence, and now there is finally something moving in the valley besides the giant, and it is a boy on his knees by a stream. Imagine the quiet of it. The whole hillside, both hillsides, holding its breath. And down in the dry creek, the boy is not in a hurry. He looks at the stones. He picks one up. He turns it in his fingers, feels the weight of it, the shape of it. If it is good, he puts it in the pouch. If it is not, he sets it back down and picks up another. He does this 5 times. 5. The text is very specific about that number. He chose 5 smooth stones. Not 1, not 3, not a handful. 5. And then he walks toward the line. Now, why 5? Nobody quite explains it. The text does not say.
Generations of readers have offered guesses, and we will hold a couple of them gently, the way you hold a possibility without forcing it into a conclusion. Some have noted that Goliath had 4 brothers, according to a later passage, that maybe the boy was thinking about what might come after the first fight, if the first fight went the way he believed it would. Some have noted that a slinger of any skill knew you might miss, and that having more than 1 stone is what a competent practitioner does, the way a doctor brings more than 1 bandage. Some have said the number is just the number, the way the writer says 10 loaves of bread and 10 wedges of cheese. Careful counting, because careful counting is how this writer tells you he was there. All of those readings are honest. The deeper reading is in the kneeling itself. Look at it again. A boy on his knees by a stream, while 2 armies watch, taking the time to choose stones. That is the state of his mind. That is what is being shown to you. There is no panic in his hands. There is no rush. He is not snatching. He is not grabbing the first thing he sees. He is doing what he has done 1,000 times in the hills, picking the right stone for the right sling, because the work matters, and because hurry will get a sheep killed. He has carried this calm down off the hillside with him into a place where calm has not existed for 40 days. And he has not noticed yet that it is unusual. To him, this is just how you prepare. 5 stones, bag closed, staff in the offhand, sling ready. Now you walk. Here is the quiet thing worth saying. Calm, in a place where everyone else is panicking, almost always looks like indifference from a distance. The soldiers on the ridge are watching him kneel by the stream, and some of them are probably angry. They want him to look as afraid as they have been. They want him to honor the weight of what is in the valley by trembling. He is not trembling. Not because he is reckless, not because he is too young to understand, because he has done this work somewhere else first. The hours in the wadi were not wasted hours. The years alone were not empty years. He learned, in places no one was watching, how to move slowly when something larger than him was close. And so now, when the audience is the largest he has ever had, 2 armies, a king, his own brothers, his hands do what his hands have always done. They choose carefully. They do not shake.
If you have ever wondered why your own preparation does not seem to count, why the long, quiet work you have been doing in a place no one sees does not look like the work other people are doing in places everyone sees, stay with this picture for a moment. The boy by the stream is not improvising. He has trained for this. He just trained for it in a way no one would have recognized as training. And there is one more thing in his pouch that the soldiers cannot see, that the giant cannot see, that none of the watchers on the ridges can see. He is not counting on the stones. He has them. He chose them. He will use one of them in a few minutes. But the stones are not the reason he is calm. The reason he is calm is the same reason he was calm in the wadi with the lion, the same reason he was calm in the fold at night with his back against the stone wall. The someone who had been listening to his songs for years is now standing in the valley with him, and he knows it the way you know whether the person beside you in the dark is breathing. He stands up from the water. He shakes the wet off his hand. He turns toward the giant, and he begins to move. And here is where every translation you have ever read does something quiet to the story, something so small you would never notice unless someone slowed down and put a finger on it. The English says, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. Smooth sentence, past tense. A boy hurries across a valley. You picture it. You move on.
The Hebrew underneath is a different verb. It is the verb you use when something is already in motion before the sentence even begins. It is the verb you use when a man does not so much start running as appear already running in the middle of the field. And it is paired with another small word that tells you when, not after the giant finished his speech, not when the giant raised his spear, not when a horn sounded. While the giant was still talking. While his voice was still rolling across the valley floor. While his mouth was still open on the same insult he had been giving for 40 days. That is when the boy moves. Picture the geometry of it. The giant is standing in the middle of the valley with his shield-bearer in front of him, going through the speech he could give in his sleep. He is looking up at the ridge of Israel, expecting the same nothing he has gotten every other morning. He glances down. There is something coming. A boy. No armor, no sword. A staff in one hand, something swinging from the other, coming fast. The giant laughs. The text records the laugh. He looks at the boy, and he sneers, and he calls down curses by his gods, and he asks, Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? He is still talking. That is the thing. He is still talking. Because for 40 days the only language in this valley has been his language, and he does not yet understand that the language has changed. And the boy keeps running. He is running across a dry creek bed and up onto open ground, and his bag is bouncing against his hip, and the 4 extra stones are knocking quietly together in the pouch, and his sling is already in his hand. Here is what most readers do not know, and what changes the picture entirely. A trained slinger in the ancient Near East was not a child throwing rocks. A trained slinger was an artillery unit on 2 legs. The sling, properly used, sent a stone the size of a plum at speeds modern reconstructions estimate around 100 miles an hour. At 30 paces, It could crack bone through bronze. At close range, against a forehead unprotected by a helmet that covered only the crown, and Goliath's helmet, like most helmets of that period, left the brow exposed. It was a weapon you did not survive being hit by. The boy is not bringing a child's toy to a man's fight. He is bringing a precision weapon to a man who has spent his life training against swords. And he is bringing it on the run. Watch this. Most slingers stopped to throw. They planted their feet, they wound up, they released. The boy does not stop. The grammar of the passage is one continuous motion. He runs. He puts his hand in the bag. He draws a stone. He fits it to the sling. He swings. He releases. All of it while he is still moving forward, still closing the distance, still inside the speech the giant has not finished. The sling whirls once, twice, 3 times above his head, and the stone leaves it at full speed, on the run, with the boy's body behind it. The stone finds the forehead. The giant stops talking. He stands there for a moment, the way large things sometimes do when the world has already changed, but their body has not gotten the message yet. And then he falls. Forward, not backward. The text is precise about that. A man hits so hard, so fast, that the strike does not throw him back. It caves something in him, and the weight of the armor pulls him down the way the weight of the armor always wanted to pull him down. 125 pounds of bronze, face first, into the dust. The shield-bearer, the man who has spent his career holding the wall of bronze, looks at the ground where his champion just landed and does not know what to do with his hands. The valley goes quiet. Not the quiet of 40 days, a different quiet. The quiet that happens when a sentence everyone has been hearing every morning has been interrupted mid-word. The kind of silence that has a hole in it where the next word was supposed to be. There is something in this image worth letting sit before we move on. The boy did not wait for the giant to be done. He did not wait for permission. He did not wait for the speech to play itself out. He did not stand on the ridge and rehearse what he would do if. He moved into the speech, against the speech, while the speech was still happening. Because he had figured out, somewhere in the hills with the sheep, that the speech was the weapon. As long as the speech was allowed to keep going, the speech was winning. The only way to answer it was to walk into it. If you have ever felt that the thing in front of you has been talking for so long it has become the only voice in the room, your own voice quieter every morning, the other voice louder, sit with this picture. The boy did not outshout the giant. He did not match the speech with a bigger speech. He simply refused to let the speech be the thing that decided how fast he moved. He moved first. He moved early. He moved before the speech was done. And the speech ended where it always could have ended, mid-sentence, with a small stone thrown by someone the speech had never accounted for. There is more to say about what he said before he ran. The words that came out of his mouth on his way across the valley, because he did speak. And what he said is the thing that explains, finally, why he was not afraid. So go back a few seconds, back to the moment just before the running starts. The boy is still on the near side of the valley floor. The giant is still in the middle, and there is a brief stretch of air between them in which words travel. The giant has already said his piece. He has cursed by his gods. He has asked his question about dogs and sticks. He has promised to feed the boy's body to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. He is doing what he has done for 40 days. He is making the valley smaller with his mouth. And now, for the first time in those 40 days, a voice comes back from the Israelite side. Not from the ridge, from down in the valley, from the boy. And what he says is so different from everything else that has been said in this place that it changes the air. He calls out across the dust, and his voice does not match the size of his body, but it carries. "You come to me," he says, "with a sword, and with a spear, and with a javelin. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down. And the whole earth will know that there is a God in Israel. And all this assembly will know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's." That is the speech. Read it slowly. Read it without the soundtrack you have been carrying around for it your whole life, the brass and the drums and the camera angle from below. Read it as a teenager in a dry creek bed, saying something out loud while a giant in 125 pounds of bronze tries to make him afraid. Notice what is in it, and notice what is not. There is no boast about his arm. He does not say, "I killed a lion." He does not say, "I killed a bear." He does not list anything he has done. He says one name, and he says it 3 times. The Lord of hosts, the Lord saves. He says, "For the battle is the Lord's, not mine, not Israel's, not the king's, the Lord's." That preposition is doing all the work. That preposition is the whole sermon. He understands something that the king on the hill, the king who has been hiding in his tent for 40 days, does not understand. The king has been measuring the fight by the rules of the fight: sword against sword, spear against spear, height against height, years of training against years of training. And by those rules, no one in Israel can win, because no one in Israel matches what is standing in the valley. The king has been doing the math the soldiers have been doing, just in a more expensive tent. The boy has been doing different math. The boy has been doing the math he learned in the wadi with the lion. The fight is not between 2 bodies. The fight is between 2 names. One name has been shouting across this valley for 40 mornings. The other name has not yet been spoken out loud. And the boy is here, on the floor of the valley, to speak it. That is what he understood that Saul did not. Saul put his own armor on the boy because Saul could only imagine the fight one way, with the largest body Israel had. The boy took the armor off because he could imagine the fight a different way, with the largest name. Look at the speech one more time. The boy describes what the giant has brought: sword, spear, javelin, 3 weapons of metal. And then the boy describes what he has brought: not 5 stones, not a sling, not a staff, a name. He does not even mention the sling in his speech. The most accurate, most lethal weapon in his hand, the thing that is actually about to bring the giant down, does not appear in his answer. Because as far as he is concerned, the sling is not what is going to win this. The sling is just what his hand happens to be holding while the win happens. There is a kind of quiet here that is hard to describe unless you have lived a version of it. It is the quiet of someone who has stopped trying to be the answer to the question. The boy is not trying to be the man big enough to beat the giant. He is not trying to convince himself he is the hero. He is just trying to put himself in the place where the name can do what the name has always done, which is fight for people who cannot fight for themselves. The lion, the bear, the flock he could not have protected with his own arms alone. He knows this because he has been here before. He has stood in front of something bigger than him and watched it fall. And the part of the story he has kept, the part he carries down into the valley today, is not the part where his hand was strong. It is the part where his hand was not the only hand in the wadi. If you have ever stood in front of something and felt that the only way to survive it would be to become a version of yourself you are not, bigger, louder, harder, more sure, sit with what the boy says here. He does not make himself bigger. He does not make his arm sound longer than it is. He just refuses to call the fight by the giant's name. He calls it by a different name. And that is the whole turning of it. And there is one last thing in the speech worth holding. He says, "And all this assembly will know." He is thinking about the army on the ridge, the men who have been hollowed out for 40 days. He is not trying to win a duel. He is trying to give a paralyzed nation back its own voice. He wants them to hear someone say the name out loud in the valley so that the name stops being a memory they used to have and becomes a sound they have just heard. The sentence the giant has been giving for 40 mornings is about to end, and a new sentence is about to begin in the valley, and the boy is going to be the one to start it. He finishes speaking. He shifts his weight onto the balls of his feet, and then, in the middle of the next thing the giant tries to say, he starts to run. Now stand back over the body. The giant is face down in the dust. The valley is still in that interrupted sentence kind of silence. The boy walks the last few steps across the ground he has just covered at a run, and the bag at his hip is still moving against him, and you can hear, if you listen, the small dry sound of 4 stones knocking together inside the leather. 4. He used 1. 4 are left. He pulls the giant's own sword out of its sheath. The writer is precise about that. It is the giant's sword, not his. And he finishes what the stone began. Then he stands, and the bag is still on his hip, and the 4 stones are still inside it. Nobody, in the whole long history of telling this story, ever asks what happened to those 4 stones. Sit with that for a second. Because the 4 stones are the part of the story we almost never look at, and they are quietly one of the most tender details in it. He carried 5 into the valley. He used 1. 4 were preparation that was never required. 4 were readiness that was never tested. 4 were the work of his hands at the stream, the kneeling, the looking, the choosing, the weighing, that in the end the day did not ask him to spend, and he did not need to know which was which. That is the thing. When he knelt by the water, he did not know which of the 5 would be the one. He did not know if the first throw would land. He did not know if the giant would step sideways. He did not know if the wind would catch the stone, or if the shield-bearer would step in front, or if he himself would slip on the loose pebbles of the dry creek.
So he prepared for all of it. He prepared for the version of the day where everything went right, and the version where it did not, and the version where he had to keep moving because the first answer was not enough. He prepared for a fight he hoped he would not have to finish in 5 throws, and he prepared for one he might. And then the first stone was the only stone, and 4 stayed in the pouch, and nobody ever knew about them. And he walked back up the hill with the giant's sword in one hand and a bag of unused readiness on his hip. Here is what is worth letting land. The 4 stones were not wasted. The 4 stones were what made the one stone calm. If he had brought one, his whole hope would have been riding on it. He would have run differently.
He would have swung the sling tighter, with the kind of grip that ruins the throw. He would have felt the weight of needing the one thing to work. With 5 in the bag, his hand could be loose. With 5 in the bag, the first throw could be just the first throw, released cleanly, on the run, without the kind of fear that would have made his fingers stiff. The 4 he never used are the reason the one he used could fly the way it did. That is the secret hidden inside the number. Preparation that does not get spent is not preparation that was for nothing. Preparation that does not get spent is what lets the preparation that does get spent be relaxed. Think about your own life for a moment. Think about the things you have learned that you have not yet had to use. The conversations you have rehearsed in your head that you never had to have. The strengths you have built up in seasons no one watched. The capacities you have grown that have never been tested in the way you imagined they would be tested. It is tempting to look at all of that and feel that it was waste. Years of learning to be patient with someone who is no longer in your life. Years of becoming strong for a fight that never came. Years of standing alone in your own wadi with your own lion, building a steadiness no one has ever asked you to demonstrate in public. 4 stones in the bag. Look at the boy walking back up the hill. He is not counting them out. He is not saying, "Well, that was a waste. I prepared for 5 and only needed 1." He does not feel cheated by the 4 stones. He feels carried by them. The 4 stones were the shape his trust took on the way across the valley. They were what allowed him to run without flinching. They were the difference between a throw made in faith and a throw made in panic. There is something the rabbis say very gently about this. They say a man who walks into a fight with only what he needs has not yet learned what readiness is. Readiness is always a little more than the moment asks for. Not because you do not trust God to provide, because trust itself produces a kind of overflow. The calm that comes from knowing you have done your part, even if your part turns out to be more than the day required. The boy did not bring 5 because he was afraid 1 would not be enough. He brought 5 because that is what his hands did when they were not afraid. If you have ever felt that the long, quiet work you have been doing is being wasted, that you have been getting ready for something that never seems to come, that you have built strengths nobody sees a use for, that you have been holding a bag full of preparation no one has ever asked you to open, let yourself look at the 4 stones for a minute. They are still in the pouch. They are still smooth from the water. They are still the right shape for the right hand. They were not for nothing. They were the company the one stone had on the way out of the bag. And then, almost as a quiet footnote, there is a strange, small detail later in the boy's life, much later, that some readers have lingered on. The 4 extra stones are never explained, and they are never thrown, and the writer never tells us what became of them. The bag is just there. The boy goes up the hill with it. And the rest of his life, the running from kings, the years in caves, the songs he writes in places nobody can find him, is going to ask him for things he could never have packed for in advance. Maybe the 4 stones are still with him on those nights. Maybe he reaches into the bag in the dark sometimes and feels them knocking together and remembers the stream and the kneeling and the calm. We are walking up the hill with him now. There is one last place to stand together before we close this evening. The place where a shepherd, no longer just a shepherd, looks back at a valley that is no longer just a valley, and the rest of his life begins. Stand on the ridge one more time. Look down. The valley is loud now in a way it has not been loud in 40 days. The Philistine army, which has been watching this duel as a formality, has just seen its champion go face down in the dust, and the rules of single combat have collapsed underneath them, and they are running. Not toward the boy, away from him. The army of Israel, hollowed out for 40 mornings, is suddenly on its feet, suddenly moving, suddenly shouting, and the sound coming up from that hillside is not the sound of soldiers. It is the sound of men who have just remembered they have voices. The shield-bearer drops the wall of bronze and runs with the rest. The 4 brothers from Gath are somewhere in that scattering, and the writer will tell us later that each of them dies in his own day, in his own duel, against men whose names history barely keeps. But that is for another evening. Tonight, only this one falls. And in the middle of the valley floor, on the dust between the 2 ridges, the boy stands over the body, and his bag is still on his hip, and the 4 stones inside it are still warm from his hand. He walks up the hill afterward. The king who could not come down to fight meets him at the top. The king who has been measuring everyone by height looks at the boy and does not know whose son he is. The boy tells him, and from that hour, nothing in his life is the same. He does not go back to the sheep, not really. He goes into the king's house. He plays the harp for a man whose own mind has begun to torment him. He marries the king's daughter. He becomes the best friend of the king's son. He runs from the king when the king tries to kill him. He hides in caves. He pretends to be mad in a foreign city to save his own life. He writes songs in those caves that we are still singing 3,000 years later. And many of those songs are about being afraid in the dark, and about waiting, and about a God who does not always answer fast, and about loving a God anyway. The boy who walked into the valley with cheese will sit on the throne of Israel for 40 years. The boy who knelt by the stream will be called, by the writer who keeps the records, a man after God's own heart. Not because his hands were clean. They were not. He will fail in ways that will break him in his old age. He will weep over a son he could not save. He will live long enough to learn that some giants are inside the house. But the shape of his life will be set on the floor of the Elah that morning, and it will never leave him. He will face things he was not trained for and did not choose, again and again, for the rest of his days. And he will face them the same way he faced the first one, by running toward them. So look at him one more time, a shepherd, no longer just a shepherd, a man with a bag on his hip and a sword in his hand, walking up a hill while a valley screams behind him. He does not look like a king yet. He looks like a tired teenager who has just done something his arms will feel for a week. And that is exactly what a king is supposed to look like the first time. Now let it settle. The valley is quiet again, but it is a different quiet. The 40-day quiet is gone. The new quiet is the kind that follows a sentence that finally got finished. The breath the army takes when it remembers it is still breathing. Maybe tonight you are standing in front of something you were not trained for. Maybe it has been talking at you for so long that you have started to take its size for the size of your whole life. Maybe you have been on the ridge doing the math, and every answer keeps coming back the same. Too small, too late, not enough. Maybe the long, quiet work you have been doing in a place no one sees has started to feel like waste. Hear this. The boy did not match the giant. He never tried. He ran toward something he could not possibly have beaten on its own terms, with a bag of small stones he chose himself, in a calm he had built somewhere else first. And the thing he carried into the valley that nobody could see, the name, the hours alone, the 4 extra stones that never had to fly, was the part that actually won. The next time the speech in your head starts again, the one that has been given the same closing argument every morning, remember the dry creek, remember the kneeling, remember the 4 stones that knocked together in the bag while he ran. He ran toward it. He did not wait for the speech to end, and neither do you have to. Let us pray just a little before we go. Father, thank you for sitting with us in this valley tonight, for letting us watch a shepherd boy carry your name across the dust. We admit we are tired. We have been doing the math for too long, and the math keeps coming out the same, and we do not always have the strength to kneel by the water. Teach our hands to choose carefully when they are not shaking. Teach our feet to move while the speech is still happening. And when we cannot do either, run toward it for us. We come to you in the name. Amen. I would love to know which moment stayed with you tonight. The boy kneeling at the stream, choosing 5 stones while 2 armies watched. The giant still talking when the running started. The 4 stones knocking quietly in the bag on the way back up the hill. Tell me below. I read what comes in here, and I think about it longer than you would guess. And next time, the night a different kind of king, a much older one, knelt alone in a garden and asked his father if there was any other way, and was told there was not, and walked toward the soldiers anyway. He ran toward it too. That story is here for you, whenever you are ready.